Hello everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a project start video for this 1/6 scale Armortek early production German Tiger 1. The model that you see here is being built for commission and belongs to a private collector. As I often mention in my build videos, I often take on commission build projects from vehicles ranging from 1/35 scale all the way up to 1/6 scale. As for availability and pricing information, that information would be best by contacting me through the email address listed below, which is info@eastcoastarmory.com. As for the base starter kit, like I mentioned before, this is an Armortek early production Tiger 1. Now, one thing that's interesting is that this model here is actually a vintage first generation Armortek Tiger. This kit here dates back to 2003, and this version here was the second Tiger 1 offering made by Armortek. When Armortek first came into being was around 2002, 2001, and their first vehicle was the German Panzer IV, as well as a mid-production German Tiger 1. Within the following year, they went ahead and released the kit that you see here. This kit here is the early production Tiger 1. It differs from their mid-production release in that it has the FIFO system as well as the early drum-style copula. Other than that, the detailing as well as the rest of the components are identical to that on the mid-production release. Approximately 72 of these kits were produced, and this was the last time Armortek went ahead and produced a early pattern Tiger 1. The previous releases have all been either mid or late productions. It is important as of note though, as of 2015, Armortek released another batch of early Tiger 1s, which are a lot more improved from the version that you see here. Now, if anyone is a fan of the channel, you will see that I went ahead and recently finished a late production Tiger 1 from Armortek. That model there is a lot different compared to this one here, in that Armortek went ahead and upgraded and improved upon this original design. It's also important to note that this is actually the second first pattern early Tiger 1 that I've done from Armortek. The first one was actually one of the first videos I even threw up on YouTube, and that model video can be found in my video listing as well as on the EastCoastArmory.com website. It's also important to note that since the release of this kit, Armortek has constantly been upgrading and revising their kit's designs, and this version here is really a more primitive form of the more recent releases, namely the late production Tiger 1 that I recently completed, and the video series of that is found on my channel. Throughout the build process, I'll go ahead and point out certain key features which differentiates these early patterns compared to their more contemporary releases. The model that you see here was purchased when new by the customer back in 2003-2004. He assembled the hull to the state that you see here. He went ahead and primed and painted the interior, and as well as a few of the other components. However, the tank never progressed past the point that you see here. It is from this point on in which I will go ahead and start the rebuild and completion process. Now, as you can see, all I have right now is just the hull and the turret. All the other components are in the shop and are awaiting construction. Just prior to starting it, we can go ahead and walk through what needs to be done to the model just prior to starting. Like I mentioned before, the hull was pre-started by the customer, who went ahead and added a coat of etch primer as well as a coat of gloss white paint for the interior. For some reason, as you can see, the paint did not hold up very well and is chipping very, very severely. Prior to doing any type of work on the model, I will go ahead and remove all of the paint that you see here in order to give a nice fresh base in order to start on the rebuild. To do the paint stripping, I went ahead and we'll be using these two products right here. The extreme abrasion should go ahead and help remove the rest of the flaking paint. And here goes the interior now that it has been deflaked. What you see here was as much as I was able to remove with the abrasive pads, as well as even with a palm sander that I showcased a little earlier. The palm sander went ahead and smoothed the edges as much as possible in order for it to make a nice smooth surface for the paint and second coat of primer to bond. Now, the paint that the customer used was actually a very good quality and was very difficult to remove it to the way you see it here. Before I go ahead and add the primer now, I'm going to check all of the fasteners to make sure that they are all Loctited and are nice and firmly bolted in place. This is a good tip to recommend for anyone who acquired an older Armortek model that was pre-started and is second-hand. It's a good idea to check all the fasteners, make sure they're all nice and tight so that the hull is one solid piece and there's no issues of it rattling apart on you while the tank is in operation. Moving towards the bottom plate of the tank, you will see that the customer also went ahead and added a coat of etch primer to the bottom plate. Even though it was etch primed, as you can see, there is a small little patch of surface rust that was popping out through. It's also important to note at this time that on these early pattern Armortek Tigers, that the sponsons as well as the rear bottom plate are actually made out of low carbon mild steel. Because of this, surface rust is something to watch out for. However, once the plates are thoroughly painted with primer, as well as their base coat, they become a lot more impervious to this type of condition. It's also important to note that this is one easy way to distinguish whether or not your Armortek is an earlier pattern or a later pattern. The earlier patterns used steel for this, while the later patterns used sheet aluminum for these plates here. Now, another side effect of the steel is that it does make the model a lot more heavier compared to the newer production versions. Currently, the hull in this configuration here weighs approximately 80 to 100 pounds. So moving the model around in this condition does require a little bit of heft. However, once the model is fully built, the added weight is negotiable, as the entire model will weigh approximately 150 to 200 pounds once fully completed. In addition to checking the fasteners on the inside, I'm also going to go ahead and revise the fasteners that you see here on the rear and front plates. As you can see, to mount the plate to the vehicle, it's facilitated with simple fasteners. They're just basic M4 hex bolts. Now, on the real tank, it's important to know that these plates here are welded in place and the fasteners are not present. As a good mod to go ahead and improve the look of the vehicle, I'm going to remove these hex bolts and in their place replace them with countersunk fasteners of the same size. Just like with all my builds, the countersunk fastener will be thoroughly blended and deleted, and it will be seamless with the rest of the body plate. Before I go ahead and prime and really start working on the suspension, I need to go ahead and add some of the details to the sponsons. One sponson detailing that is found on the Tiger 1 is that of a very elaborate angle brace which braces the sponson with the bottom of the lower hull. This detailing is included on all the Armortek tanks. However, on the really first generation batch of Tiger 1s, it was done in a different way. In this tube here is the original kit supplied components. They're thoroughly wrapped in bubble wrap and are very nicely done. After I go ahead and take the bubble wrap off, you'll see what the pieces look like. And here go the hull braces, now removed from their packaging. As you can see, for being over 10 years old, they are in fantastic condition. Not even a single speck of surface rust is found on these pieces. As you can see, they are made out of steel. They're laser cut and are pre-bent. They have their kinks in them to follow the contours of the lower sponson plate, and have their appropriate detailing with their little wavy pattern, as well as the locations for the rivets. What's interesting is that this design here was found, like I mentioned, on the early pattern of Armortek tanks. The later pattern of Armortek tanks, when Armortek switched from steel sponson and lower pulp plates to that of aluminum alloy, these components here were built into the sponsons. Ironically, these versions here are actually technically a little bit more realistic and true to the real vehicle, as on the real Tiger 1, they were an actual plate just like this that was mounted to the tank. On the modern versions of the Armortek tank, you would only have this side portion detailing, and this top portion rail here would have to be scratch built out of plastic or some other medium. These components here now are going to go into primer prior to installation, as because of the material they're made in are susceptible to rust. Once the primer is added, the rust prevention will be a lot better than just mounting it on and just priming the surface. Before I go ahead and start adding the lower hull components, I need to do a little bit of body work and some tweaks in order to get the tank ready for the installation of the parts. Most notably, it's going to be the bodywork for the sponsons here. As you can see, from the way the construction of the sponsons are designed, there have tabs that have holes in them that are bent upward in order for them to bolt on to the side hull. Because of this design, you will have a small little gap in these locations here where the tabs are present. This is true for all of the Armortek tanks from this early model here all the way up to the current generation releases. On all of my builds, I always plug these up with the bodywork, and then I always go ahead and sculpt in detail weld beads in these locations. In addition to doing the bodywork on those portions there, a quick mod that I did was I replaced the hex head fasteners that were on the front and rear plates. As we recall, on these older versions of the tank, hex head fasteners are utilized to mount the parts on. Obviously, the hex heads are not present on the real build, so what I did was I went ahead and added the countersunk to all of the fastener locations and replaced the hex head fasteners with countersunk fasteners. When I do the bodywork for the sponsons, the fasteners here will also be deleted and blended into the rest of the paneling. This is also true for the ones in the back. Another noteworthy tip, that prior to the bodywork, I went ahead and made sure that all the fasteners were installed to the vehicle and were nice and secured on with Loctite, as well as making sure that the fasteners themselves were actually screwed in all the way. That's noteworthy to mention because on these older style Armortek vehicles, they had a tendency of the holes not lining up with the corresponding plate that they need to connect to. This was an issue on these very early production style vehicles. However, since this period, Armortek has really changed their designs, and the quality is to the point where this is no longer an issue. However, it is something to keep in mind, specifically if anyone is acquiring an older style Armortek kit like this and is about to start one or maintain one that was acquired secondhand. To make sure everything was in their proper location, I went ahead and removed each fastener one at a time. Once the fastener is removed, you can see if there's any stress with the component or if the piece is properly aligned. It is also at this time, once the fastener is removed, you can add some Loctite and remount it to the vehicle so that the fasteners are nice and Loctite in place and will have no issues of them possibly getting or rattling loose on you while the model is finished and in operation. Now, if the fastener, if you notice there's a lot of stress on the piece, if it's very tight or it's not fitting in properly, the way to alleviate that is to first drill out the hole that's in the plate here with a drill bit that's slightly larger than the actual hole that's already in the plate. By drilling out and removing this slight amount of material, this should be enough to get the holes to line up and for you to install the fastener. Also, if you notice on the side hull here, I went ahead and enlarged the countersinks, making them deeper. The purpose of that is that when it comes to adding the bodywork, when the epoxy or the body filler goes over this component here, it will give me a lot of body filler to sand away. If the fastener is flush with the plate, when it comes time to sanding down the piece, the fastener will always slightly stick above the metal plate, which will leave issues as it's almost impossible to blend in. If the piece is below the plate like this, you can fill this in with body filler and then gradually sand away the body filler until it's absolutely flush with the hull. This is one technique that I do on all of my Armortek builds. This same procedure was done to all of the panels that I went ahead and replaced the fasteners on. And here goes the side rail now mounted to the hull. Now, one thing as of note, the fasteners that are utilized are button head Allen screws. The kit wants you to use a standard hex bolt, or I believe a cap screw, in order for the installation of this component. Now on the real tank, like I mentioned on the late production Tiger video, these are actually rivets that are used to mount this component here to the side of the hull. The use of a standard fastener will hurt the look of the build, so rather than using a standard fastener, I used a dome head screw. As the build progresses, the tool mount in the center of the fastener will be deleted, as well as the actual rivets will be drilled and mounted to the hull in order to complete the look. In addition to that, sculpted weld beads will be added to all of appropriate locations. All this is to follow as the build progresses. And that concludes this project start video for this first pattern Armortek early production German Tiger 1. If you like this video, stop by and like us on Facebook. And don't forget to check out eastcoastarmory.com for more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detail components. Thank you.